Spiri by Johannes. This is a classic middle grade story about a little girl that has no family and goes to live with her grandfather in the mountains, and it's so cute and adorable. But I think the story is 5 stars only in the context of children's stories. A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. This is an adult grimdark fantasy in the first book in the Age of Madness series, and I'm gonna put this one in I think the book is objectively good. I wouldn't call myself too attached to it because there's a different book we'll talk about later on that definitely takes that spot, and when I compared them, not the same thing. But I think this is an objectively good book. I think Joe Abercrombie's writing is phenomenal. Rarely is there an author that can wield words in such a fantastic way and develop twisted characters that you're gonna love. So I'm definitely recommending it. Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. This is an adult sci-fi and the first book in the Expanse series. That's right. I think this one is objectively good. By the way, I'm not ordering the books in every category in any particular way. I just drop the book where it falls. But objectively good. I think it has a very interesting plot, a very interesting scientific space opera implications, and it has characters that are gonna both infuriate you and appeal to you. It has a very interesting mystery. It's gonna surprise you. Definitely recommend. Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This is an adult dark academia contemporary fantasy and the first book in the Alex Stern series, and I'm gonna put it in 5 stars under certain circumstances. When it comes to urban contemporary fantasy, definitely 5 stars. Into the Wild by John Krakauer. This is a non-fiction that I read recently and absolutely loved, about a man who walked into the Alaskan wild and never came out. I'm gonna put this one again in the category 5 stars when it comes to nonfiction, because again, it's gonna bore to death a lot of people. Definitely appealed to me though, and I know I'm not advertising these books very, very well, but I don't want to give you unrealistic expectations. If you know yourself to like nonfictions that are sticking to the facts, possibly trigger some emotion in you, but that's not their main goal. Their main goal is to actually tell the factual story, then this is definitely one of the best written ones. But again, only 5 stars when it comes to nonfiction. Nobody's Boy by Hector Malot. This is a very beautiful classic story about a boy with no parents who travels around and finds friends, and that's all I'm gonna say. This is objectively one of the best written books I've ever read, and I highly recommend it, but I'm gonna put it in S tier because it's one of the first books I ever loved, and it's so dear to me, so special. I reread it multiple times, and I'm gonna continue doing that, and every time I do, I cry and I smile genuinely. It's lovely. 2001, A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. This is a classic sci-fi and one of the best books ever written. I highly recommend it. I think it's objectively very, very good. It has a very interesting structure. It starts with a bit of a historical account of what happened millennia ago, and then it moves on to more current timeline with kind of a different mood and writing style where they're dealing with the long-term consequences of what happened all this time ago, and then it switches gears again, changes the setting again, and introduces a new struggle, and then at the end it becomes very metaphysical and has one of the most beautiful endings I've ever read. I was a little tempted to put it in S tier, but I'm actually gonna leave it here. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it and if you're looking to read classic sci-fi. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. One of the first books I've ever loved and one of the few books that I've read more than 7 times. I absolutely adore this one. I think it's objectively great, but it's very special to me. It has one of the most beautiful and well-written and well-balanced love stories, and one of the few that I can actually stomach, but I think its best quality are the phenomenal characters. Every single one of them is so vivid. I was laughing out loud with this book. I continue to do so. Highly recommend. 1984 by George Orwell. I really want to put this one in objectively good because the writing style of this man and his philosophical musings and his near psychic abilities to predict the future like he did in so many ways are so fantastic. I'm a little concerned that the pacing of the book and its rather introspective nature at times, as well as the fact that it's really depressing, might make it unappealing to a lot of people, but honestly, no. objectively a great book. I can't not put it here, all right? Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is an adult sci-fi and it's one of the best books I read, I think last year. It was so fun, so interesting. I think it's an objectively great book. Andy Weir has a fantastic writing style. I think he manages to make some of the most interesting characters out of regular people and put them in extraordinary situations. The science was on point, the action was on point, the downtime was on point, the philosophical aspect was on point. I definitely think this is an objectively great book. Radiance by Grace Draven. This is an adult fantasy romance and I'm actually gonna put it over here because again, I think it's only 5 stars when it comes to fantasy romance. If you take the book out of that category and put it strictly into fantasy, it's gonna fall very short. But I really liked it and it's one of the few romance books I actually recommend freely. Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. This is an adult epic fantasy and the first book in the Book of the Ancestor series and I absolutely loved it. I think it's very original. I think it's very well written. I think it has some of the most interesting characters and some of the most interesting plot unfolding, if I can put it that way. I love it. I think it's objectively a great book. I was considering putting it in the S tier because it's one of the first few books I read after coming back to reading and it motivated me to read even more, but I'm gonna put it in objectively good. And I know that some people are gonna disagree with me on that, but they'll be wrong. Sweet Home Alaska by, I forgot the name of the author. This is a book that I read many years ago and loved at the time, and while I still think it's a great book, I wouldn't give it 5 stars right now. It's middle grade or young adult, I think. It's a very cute, very nice story, but definitely not 5 stars worthy. Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is a YA sci-fi and one of the most fun books that I've ever read, but I don't think I would give it 5 stars if I had to rate it right now, even though again, I absolutely loved it. The book just has too many flaws to be 5-star worthy. Alright, I had to abandon civilization and completely change my location. I hope it's gonna work out, especially without a proper microphone, so please excuse me if the audio is terrible and let's continue with ranking my 5 stars books that I've rated, whatever, you know. Next we have 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This is a young adult fantasy heist, and while I think it is a very good book, I'm gonna be honest with you, and this is gonna be probably a controversial opinion for a lot of people, but I'm gonna put it again in 5 stars only in certain circumstances because the book is rather flat when it comes to dimension. There are a lot of heavy, valuable emotional moments, but when it comes to plot depth as well as more philosophical considerations, the book kind of falls flat, and that's not to say that a book is not good. Again, it is good in the context of YA fantasy, probably one of the 3 best I've ever read. Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Nouvel. This is an adult sci-fi and one of the best sci-fi books I've read, though to be honest with you, now knowing the ending of the series, I can't help but be a little bit disappointed. Still, I would put this in objectively good because I think the writing style that the author, or rather writing device that the author has chosen to utilize for the book is very original, and he's managed to tell a very good story despite the limitation that he had put on himself. I found the scientific as well as political implications of the discoveries that were made to be very intriguing, and I found the characters very compelling. That doesn't continue until the end of the series, but currently we are only talking about this book. Tag Life. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. This is a very interesting classic fantasy that's bordering more so on magical realism, and I'm gonna put it in objectively good because I think it's very interesting in its philosophy and it reads more like a fable, and I think that everyone who reads it might actually come out of it with a different understanding and appreciation for it. And I would also like to mention that there is a very interesting religious undertone that actually takes into consideration more than just one religion, but kind of treats it more philosophically than anything else. I found the book very relaxing, very atmospheric, and again, more so a fable than anything else. Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogers, and this is a YA fantasy romance, I would say, that has a very interesting setting of a magical library and books that actually are alive, and I will put this in the lowest tier because despite the fact that I read it somewhat recently, I'm gonna be honest with you, at the time I think I was just more affected by the atmosphere than anything else, and the book definitely doesn't go deep enough into setting and character development to warrant a higher tier. Sandstorm by James Rollins. This is an adult action-adventure thriller mystery that I really enjoyed, but I'm going to put in, you have to be realistic about these things because the book is very good. It goes in a lot of depth into the mysteries that are set by the author. It has very interesting settings, very exciting plot, but it also has some plot lines that I find slightly Hallmark-esque, if I can put it that way. There are these very strange, in my opinion, romantic plot lines that are kind of dull and kind of unnecessary in my opinion, but take a certain chunk of the book. So when it comes to the context of this type of books, they are great. Frankly, I'm very surprised that the series is not more popular. I think the books from it should be on the level of Dan Brown's books, at least. The Body in the Library by Agatha Christie. This is yet another Agatha Christie book, but it's from a different series, Miss Marple, that is also adorable, really good. I am very tempted to put it into objectively good because I think it's about on the level of Hercule Poirot, but I find it slightly more small town murder mystery oriented. So I'm gonna put it in 5 stars under particular circumstances. I think it's a great series, but again, I wouldn't rank it on the level of Hercule Poirot yet. The Brothers Lionheart by Astrid Lindgren. This is a fantastic story and it's gonna go in S tier because this is again one of the books that I read very early in my life and absolutely adored. It's one of the first books that made me cry, but in a way that was kind of cathartic, and I would highly recommend it, though beware, this is a very heavy book, even if it's written for children. Them Swedish people do not joke. The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. Objectively, one of the best books, one of the best series ever written out there, probably the best grimdark anything I've ever read, but it's gonna go in S tier because it is so very special to me. I could reread it endlessly, finish it and start it all over again. It contains some of my most favorite characters of all time. Fantastic series. If you haven't read it, even if you're not into fantasy too much, please do so. It doesn't contain that much magic. There's no fairies flying around. There's a lot of violence, but it's digestible, I would call it. The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This is an adult, I think, fantasy, and I am a little split because while I think it is very good, I'm not sure if it would, you know what? I'm putting it here. I think it's objectively a very good series. I really like the setting. I really like the characters. I really like the mystery, and the author managed to surprise me, even though I guessed some of the twists. I didn't guess all of them, and I'm really intrigued by this world. I recommend it. What can I say? The Black-Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. This is one of the first books I reviewed on my channel and one of the books I very much love. I'm gonna put it in objectively good because I wouldn't qualify it as that near and dear to me, but the book is so well written. Christopher Buehlman has a fantastic writing style, and he's one of those authors very similar to Joe Abercrombie that can make you laugh in the weirdest situations. He writes a really gruesome world and really gruesome scenes. I really like his world building. It's just a fantastic book, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. There are so many quotes I actually wanted to use by this author to put here, but a lot of them are very long, and a lot of them I really like because they make the reader laugh while reading about a terrible situation. Shadow Scent. The first book was The Darkest Bloom, I think. It's a young adult fantasy romance, and frankly, I would never give it 5 stars right now. I think I just read it in a combination with a few other books that were much lower quality, and this one nicely surprised me. It's still a very nice book as far as young adult fantasy goes, and if you're into that kind of thing, I would recommend it, but again, wouldn't give it 5 stars nowadays. A Ballad for Georg Hennig by Viktor Paskov. This is a recounting of a real life story from the life of the author himself, and I will put it right here because this book absolutely destroyed me. It was so valuable. It was so good. I don't want to tell you anything more about it. I think it's in my May wrap up or something like that. The fact that it's a real life story and a few letters that were actually printed at the end of the book really floored me. It was just such a good story and so important to me. Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. This is a young adult with an asterisk fantasy, and I'm putting an asterisk because it has a lot of adult themes in it, and I think this is an objectively very good book. The writing of the author is great. His ability to put philosophical concepts into his narrative and to create a very interesting world that wouldn't just be interesting for children. It is whimsical, but at the same time I think it would have a lot of appeal to adults as well. It had a very interesting magic system, and the concept of demons in this world was phenomenal. It's just such a good book. Persuasion by Jane Austen. I will put this book in great 5 stars under certain circumstances because the book had a very slow narrative and a lot of repetitive scenes. And while I still think the book deserves 5 stars, it's only in the context of classical period pieces that deal with very boring subjects. Promise of Blood by Brian McClellan. This is an adult fantasy, epic fantasy, and I will put it here because it's not yet as special to me. It is an objectively great fantasy book, very similar vibe to the First Law world. I would kind of qualify it as a combination between Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, The First Law by Joe Abercrombie, and The Black Company by Glenn Cook. It's just such a nice combination. It has such great characters, such great mysteries. I absolutely loved it. Highly recommend. Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. This was on my August TBR, and the first book I actually finished in the month of August, and I am split because the book is objectively great, but it also left a very big impression on me. I kind of want to put it in S tier, to be honest with you. It's so good. Okay, I'm gonna put it here for now. Objectively a great book. If you like sci-fi, you should read this. If you don't like sci-fi, you should read this to start liking sci-fi. But beware, it has a bit of an open ending and kind of focuses more on the philosophical implications of first contact with aliens, so to speak. It's just so good, okay? I can't believe I'd never heard about this book until this year. I so highly recommend it. I really want everybody to read this book. All right. Let's pretend it hasn't been 3 to 5 business days since I last filmed and continue with this endless tier ranking. The Emberblade, objectively good. Interesting characters, old mysteries, world-ending stakes, weird friendships, scary places. This is what a big chunk of the classic fantasy books would look like if they were written in the modern style. I loved it, and you should read it. The Hobbit. Let me make you hate me real quick by putting it into you have to be realistic about these things category. I mean, look, we can all agree that this is a great book with a fun story, but Tolkien, bless his superior mind, has a tendency to digress slightly and also write into his books almost as many songs as there are actual scenes. I'd say this is a fantastic classic fantasy, and in this particular context, definitely 5 stars. And while we're on the subject, let's tackle the big one. The Return of the King by, would you believe it, the same author. This one is just as, pardon the word, meandering at times, and it contains no less, if not more songs, and for that matter spans even more pages. The author took the opportunity to describe every single rock and bush that our characters encountered, to the point where I think I can imagine those better than some of the main characters of other books, and the book holds such a special place in my heart that absolutely nothing can knock it off S tier. And to me, this is such a meaningful read, even beyond the amazing world it's already set in. The Ice Dragon by George R.R. Martin. This is a short story that I read so many years ago, I can barely remember what it was about, but it goes into S tier because, for one thing, I remember being really impressed at the time, and for another, the book is actually a gift by the team I was managing so many years ago, and that is really cute. The Eye of the World. Listen, I have a very strange relationship with this series. I love the plot, but I don't like the character work or the writing style of the author for that matter. However, I think the first book is objectively good, so I'll put it over here, but I'd like to clarify that 4 books in, everything else has been rated lower. The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. This is yet another classic fantasy, which will go into the objectively good category. Now, let me be honest, this is a very dense read, but besides that, there is absolutely nothing nothing wrong with it. It's just a great book. The Final Empire, immediately S tier. It's dark, it's atmospheric, it's gloomy, it's action-packed, it's character-driven, it's political, it's full of mysteries, and it's super high stakes. It's also one of the books that got me back into reading back in 2019, which is why I think its place at the top is well deserved. The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is an adult epic fantasy that was very popular on booktube a few years ago, and I read it back then, and I honestly don't know what to do with this one because the book is great, except the beginning is so slow, it had me DNFing the book the first time I tried to read it. It was really good after that. Once it got going, I ate it up, but I just can't help remembering that part. So I can't honestly put it in either of the top categories, yet I feel like I'd be lynched. Scott Lynch. Sorry. I feel like I'd be committing a high crime if I rank it any lower. You know what? Bitter truth above sweet lies. The book is only 5 stars if you don't mind trekking through a bit of a slog. There, I said it. The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. S tier. This is a very special book. And is it the best? Yes, to me. Will it be the same for you? Can't tell. It's allegory through and through, so it will give you what you already have in your mind at best. To me, this is pure treasure. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Objectively a great book, another great epic fantasy. Writing, characters, mystery, plot, feels, world, always great. Can't say a bad thing about it, besides the obvious that it might very likely never get finished, but that's a different topic. Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. This is another epic fantasy that is objectively 5 stars in my personal opinion. This whole series is pure fun through and through. It has a great main character duo, great action, great twisty plot, a lot of surprises, some very good mysteries, very fun world building, high stakes, just a whole lot of good time. Triste of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. A confession time. I am super biased here, so I'm putting this one in objectively good, but take this with a bag of salt, please, because I can't help but being influenced by the significance of this book for the whole of the Cosmere, so whatever I say here is gonna be colored by bias. The Arithmetist by Brandon Sanderson. This is a YA fantasy and it's firmly in the you have to be realistic about these things category. This is a 5-star YA fantasy and that's all it is. Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. This is an adult high fantasy and such a wild card because it's a bit of a weird read, but I think it's objectively good. It's very original, it has a very fun cast of characters and magic system, it's very easy to read and get excited about, especially this first book from the series, so I recommend. The Secret by Julie Garwood. This is a historical romance, I think. Frankly, I can barely remember what it was about, but judging by the pattern here, I'd wager Scottish lairds are involved. I don't know what I was thinking giving this 5 stars. Sure, it was a good read, especially compared to a lot of the other romances that I've tried, but definitely not a 5 stars, at least to me. If you're into romance though, I think this would definitely appeal to you. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. This is an objectively good book, but I'll put it in S tier because it's one of those reads that I loved as a child and still find comfort in them. Now, I know some of the language used in this book is somewhat outdated and all that, specifically referring to some offensive words, but we're intelligent beings and I'm sure we can keep calm about words that were said over 100 years ago and were not considered a taboo back then, right? The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a historical fiction about a Hollywood star and I will have to put it in objectively 5 stars. Now, chances are, if you're not interested in reading about the affairs of a Hollywood star, this book might not be for you, but the depth and nuance with which the book is written just can't be denied. The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This is a classic children's book and what a lovely read it was, but it's only 5 stars in that particular category in my opinion. Now, had I read this book when I was a child, it probably would have lived in S tier. However, I only got to it when I was already in the possession of a dull grown-up brain, so here we are. The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I am beaming this one straight to S tier, and if you've watched my videos for any length of time, you're probably not surprised. I'm really tempted to start blathering about this series, but I will exercise restraint because I'm pretty sure most of you have already heard about it a ton. Let me just say this, that this book is so epic and cathartic that I had to read some of the scenes from it standing up. I couldn't possibly sit still. So there, do with that what you will. Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson. Lovely story, lovely atmosphere, probably my favorite YA character ever. Loved the book. Realistically though, it's a bit simplistic, and as such, it only reaches 5 stars in the realm of YA fantasy. Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This is such a good book. Love the characters, love the magic, the twists, the swords, one in particular. Even loved the little bit of romance that's in there. So objectively, 5 stars. Women by Charles Bukowski. This is a very interesting case because realistically, I shouldn't be liking this at all. In a way, you can summarize it as a string of sexual encounters, heavy drinking, and hangovers in a random order. However, there are deeper themes one might find between the lines if one knows to look for them or if one is looking for them, which is not the same thing. And so, is it objectively good? I think so, but here's the honest truth. I can't tell. I don't know whether I discovered the hidden part or whether I invented it. I kinda wish I'd added a 5th category, 5 stars worthy weirdness. Oh well, YOLO, as the kids were saying 10 years ago. Objectively 5 stars. Sue me. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. I will shock you all and add it over here. Did I like the book enough to give it 5 stars? Yes. Was it because it was a part of the Cosmere that confirmed some of my suspicions? Partly yes. Would I have given it 5 stars if that wasn't the case? I don't know, but I suspect not. So hence why I'm putting it as 5 stars under some very specific circumstances. And lastly, Full Metal Alchemist by Hiromu Arakawa. And if you knew how much I love this series, you'd be surprised not at all to see me slap it over here squarely in S tier. And I can already hear some of you saying, you put all of these amazing books and authors under this pile of drawings? And yes, I did. Read the quote, comrades. Alright, that's it, and I think we've all had enough at this point. I hope you enjoyed watching this mess and that maybe you found a book that you want to read. If that's the case, please let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to see some other random videos of mine where more likely than not my hair would be different among other things, check out this playlist. Bye.